was a bit of a shock when my grandfather died and didn't leave my dad any of my great-grandfather's things. Most likely, he didn't want to help play into his unhealthy fascination, a decision I and the rest of my extended family greatly appreciated. Anybody to meet my father was quick to encounter his bubbling enthusiasm for the Old West. When I was 7, he took me to the Grand Lake to see Unforgiven, the newest of Clint Eastwood's films. He picked me up from school, grinning like a maniac, in full cowboy gear, complete with an appropriately gaudy pork pie hat. He smacked the side of the car, pretending to spur a horse into action, and looked at me with pointed eyebrows. I always knew what was coming with that look, and he knew that I knew. We inhaled sharply and both let out a booming hi-ya. Let's ride. Often my father would draw ire from his cocky manufactured drawl and chronic habit of intimidation. When confronted, he would attribute his Western frontier obsession to his ancestry, a connection to my great-grandfather. A true frontiersman, he would explain. I'm just doing right by him. Obviously, that's a flimsy reason. The truth is, I don't even think he knew why he was so enamored with the idea. No one but my grandfather knew much of anything about the brave settler. That was my great-grandfather, not even about the town that he supposedly founded and defended against the last dregs of wickedness plaguing the pre-modernized West. As the story goes, my father was unfazed by my grandfather's refusal to validate his infatuation. He continued to play up his connection to the Old West, even going as far as joining a cowboy reenactment troupe in San Bernardino and amassing a surely world record-winning Old West memorabilia collection. He would often tell progressively dramatized stories about my great-grandfather's supposed adventures on the frontier, even though those who stayed around long enough to hear them were just humoring him. Despite my attempts to regularly spend time with my father, an activity I've learned is impossible to do while also remaining unembarrassed, I felt a rift grow between us as he slips further into delusion, while I become grounded. Slowly, I've started to gain the things that are becoming of a man: a fiance, a dog, a stable, well-paying job, friends, and a too expensive house. Lately, he's struck me as just one of those eccentrics you encounter out in the world, which I observed is probably a similar feeling as those who meet him for the first time. In times of vulnerability, I hate myself for thinking that thought. He's my father, not a gimmick. But no matter how much I regretted my disdain for his way of life now, the fact remained that my dad lived a lie, and I didn't. At least, that's what I thought until today. Appearing on my doorstep was a small, worn cardboard box. The corners were stained, and the stench of mold and decay was overpowering. It was obvious that it had been neglected in some damp corner for years, since it was addressed to Nephew Wyatt and flaunting a P.O. Box return address in Maine. It was probably from my Uncle Howard, who I hadn't seen since his retreat into hermithood after a messy divorce. With suspense, I brought the box inside. No one had heard from Uncle Howard in almost a decade, and suddenly a box from him shows up on my doorstep. I sat down on my couch and gingerly ran scissors through the hasty layers of clear duct tape holding the box closed. Inside was a single journal, beaten and blemished, with a note sitting on top spelling out something that made my heart skip a beat. "Do not show him," scrawled in large, harsh font, stared back at me from the inside of the box. I reached inside and turned the note over to reveal a longer, even more cryptic message in neat cursive. "Dear Wyatt," the note read, "I am afraid I can no longer keep this. When your grandfather entrusted it to me in his will, it was my full intention to keep it safe until my own death. I can no longer bear having it in my possession. It's too much. Please, for his own sake, don't show this to your father. I am afraid he will try to go there, to Whispering Pines. Don't let him go." The note ended there. As I set it down and picked up the tattered journal, I hesitated. There was no doubt in my mind that it would contain something revealing, but that isn't what made me stop. Something I noticed that immediately put a chill through my spine. As I looked up, the lights were off. All of them. I didn't turn them off, and even though it was the middle of the day and the windows were open, the light coming through was dim and muted. The room was shrouded in unnatural, swirling shadows, bent by the noir sunbeams. The silence in the room suddenly sounded loud, as if the entire space was waiting to hear something. I wasn't alone. I was becoming good and paranoid now, my heart beating so fast it could have been trying to tear its way out of my chest and run away. My throat closed, and my eyes subconsciously darted to the darkest corners of the room, expecting something to come racing towards me out of the abyss. My ears filled with the sound of my own heavy, labored breaths. Time started to slow down, and I felt every agonizing second as my mind raced to fight the creeping dread seeping into my every pore. I let out an involuntary whimper. This paranoia seemed manufactured, imposed, but I was falling prey to it and its unseen creator. I couldn't move, not even a tilt of the head. All the anxious thoughts racing through my brain were slowly replaced by a chanting mantra in a voice that didn't match my own. It whispered loudly with a shrill, building urgency, "Come to Whispering Pines." My head was almost filled to the brim with pure panic. The white noise in my ears became louder and louder until even my previously deafening gulps of air were drowned out. A terrifyingly strong pressure pushed on my brain like a migraine. The primal part of me had already accepted death. In this fight or flight moment, my instincts had chosen neither. In what could be my final seconds, my overloaded and overwhelmed brain managed to eke out only a single comprehensible thought. What the hell was happening? Almost to answer my thought, it stopped. The ceiling lights flickered and returned, and the sunlight coming through the window went back to its normal hue. I fell to the floor like a marionette doll. I spent a few moments shocked, terrified to move or look around. I wasn't sure that it was over. Attempting to shake off my clamminess, I stared at the journal I had picked up what seemed like forever ago. Far from providing a distraction, the front cover renewed the fading feeling of foreboding. Then at Wardock, California, 1898. Then at my great-grandfather. The hair on my arm holding the book stood on end. But I was in the stuff now. As far as I was concerned, I needed to commit. I opened the front cover to reveal a faded tintype photo printed on a thin sheet of metal tucked in front of the first page. It pictured a large group of people, the men wearing loose cotton overshirts and chaps, and the women long, patchy dresses with the odd bonnet. They looked beaten up, dirt mudded their faces and hands. They carried a palpable weariness, but were smiling broadly. In the center kneeled a beaming man. That was the spitting image of my grandfather. He wore his age well. His silver hair provided a curious contrast to his lack of wrinkles. The kind brown eyes I recognized were similar to my father's. He was obviously tall, and even while kneeling in front of the group he was higher than their torsos. He held his faded hat to his chest. The backdrop to this old photo was an impossibly dense grove of trees, each trunk practically pressing up against the other. The branches seemed to intermingle and overlap, forming a strong barricade. It almost looked intentional. I flipped the picture. Whispering Pines, 1898, day of arrival. There it was again, that name. I shuddered. I turned the photo back over and began to place it to the side, preparing to read, but I stopped cold. My great-grandfather was the only one remaining in the picture. Every other member of the group was missing. He no longer sported his wide, genuine grin. He was scowling, with squinting, hardened eyes, and looking a decade older. The lack of color didn't put into question that he was covered in blood, practically drenched. Without warning, my great-grandfather's mouth started to move. "Come here, Wyatt," he beckoned. "Come to Whispering Pines." As I watched in horror, the picture started to come alive, the gray drops of blood dripping and pulling at his feet as he stood up and started walking towards the edge of the frame. He grinned again, but it was an impossibly wide smile, a sinister one that reached the edge of his face. I cried out and dropped the picture. This time, though, nothing stopped. He continued his march towards the camera lens, a slow, lurching walk that seemed inhuman. I couldn't tear the photo, I realized. It was made of metal. I sprinted to my kitchen, panting with fear. I need to burn it. I tore through the shelves and cupboards, looking for matches, a lighter, anything. "Wyatt," the voice boomed from the living room. It sounded louder now, more real. I finally came across a dusty butane torch in a cupboard and barreled back to the living room. My shaky hands could barely keep a strong grip on the torch, but I squeezed the button and successfully ignited it. My great-grandfather, or rather some creature that had assumed his image, hadn't reached the front yet, but it was close enough for me to see that its eyes weren't quite right. In each familiar brown eye were two pupils. Kneeling, I pointed the blue flame towards the picture, watching it blacken as the print was erased. It was over. I spent a long time kneeling on that floor in disbelief. The reality of my experience hit me then, and I cried. Some part of me knew that I had left a big piece of myself behind. I stayed on the floor, alternating between stunned silence and regretful tears for hours until I slept. When I awoke, calm, I decided against reading the journal and stowed it back in the box and put it in the garage. For the following week, part of me thought that the worst was behind me. Regardless, the intensity, the vividness of the experience was so raw and horrifying that I've been avoiding looking at pictures for a while. My fiancé is now the designated male retriever. At night I still dream disconcerting dreams. One recurring nightmare I struggle with places me in a wide meadow in a small valley surrounded by trees. I look around and notice that the tree line grows closer when I'm not looking. I try to stop it, spinning around in circles to stop its advancement, but to no avail. The tree line comes nearer and nearer until a ring of evergreens surrounds my body like a cage. I lose my ability to move. My vision goes blurry and dark. I feel a coldness spread throughout my body. I want to grow, to live. I want to reach towards the sun and feed off of its rays. My thoughts become slow and meandering, and my focus wanes. I realize I have become a tree. Recently, I've been feeling strangely compelled to head to the garage, take out the journal, and start reading. This morning, I woke up from the same nightmare sprawled in front of the garage door. I got up and realized that my fingers were bleeding. The door to the garage was locked and painted with bloody scratch marks. A week ago, I was in control of my own life, and now I'm being sucked into a mystery of a waking nightmare. I've cursed Uncle Howard and his selfishness, considered passing it on to my father to attempt to stop the insanity, but a part of me I didn't know was there has steeled itself for what's to come. I don't think it's going to stop until I look over the journal. I haven't gotten a single night of good sleep since I opened Uncle Howard's box. After waking up with raw, bleeding fingers outside of the garage door, I bought cheap but sturdy handcuffs from Party City and started chaining myself to the bedpost in the evening. While I lie there, waiting to slip into another disquieting dream, I can see the journal in my mind's eye, lying quietly in the box in the dark. This morning, while my wrist ached from trying to free itself in the night, and my brow hosted a layer of cold sweat, I sat on the edge of the bed. I was starting to splinter under the weight of the events of the past couple of weeks. I was tired, so damn tired, and the stress was making me question myself if I truly belonged here, in this house, on this bed. Everything felt wrong, fake, as if I had crossed into a world where I no longer had any agency. I've probably never had any anyway. In my formative years, I fibbed constantly. Little lies, like adding a half point to my GPA in conversation, or buying expensive sneakers during the holiday season to pretend I had gotten normal gifts and not adjustable suspenders. The fibs eventually became flat-out falsifications, glimpses into my ideal reality where my father was a father and not a low-functioning alcoholic, where I was going to turn out okay and not just like him. My obsession with normalcy spiraled. I spent weeks filling out cursive workbooks at night in order to scribble convincing notes from my mother in my lunches. "I love you. Have an amazing day," they would say. "Have fun at school." I'd scoff and make a show of throwing it away. Much too early to correct, I started eating away at myself. The guilt gnawed at me. The regret that I couldn't will my fictions into existence eroded my ambition. The comfort of evading shame from outside judgment won instead of the comfort of self-respect. I brought the habit into my adulthood, too. I tell imaginary stories, conjure surface-level problems to seem relatable, and create comfy characters to fill the gaping hole. I hold opinions that aren't mine, espouse convictions without conviction. Even before the journal surfaced on my doorstep, I would watch my fiancé sleep and feel a deep, sinking shame, because I was a collection of lies, a bundle of wishes on shooting stars, and she might never know how truly far apart we were. But then, where does the journal fit? It seemed fated, a day I had been waiting for, or a destiny unrealized. Perhaps it's the way out, a path to redemption. Yes, keeping it in my garage, hiding it. What if that was the wrong answer? Yes, that's an opportunity for change. to start over and start to write a new narrative, one where I don't get scared by what I don't understand, to forge my own fate. Yes, yes, yes. Steeled with this newfound conviction, I rose from the bed with a strength and purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I strolled, almost gliding, to the garage door, passively noticing that it was no longer locked. I wrapped my hand around the knob and pushed, revealing a pitch-black room. It was strangely dark, as if it was nullifying all of the light that tried to spread inside. I reached my hand in to turn the light switch on. A dry tut emanated from a sinister, raspy voice somewhere in the garage. Part of me expected something like this to happen, but that expectation accomplished nothing in the face of the wave of shivers exploding throughout my body. I'm going to have my damn way for once, I thought. Oh yes, Wyatt, you can have your way. Yes, the voice hissed. I jumped, because your way is my way. A loud, hacking chortle pierced the blackness. What does that mean? I waited. Silence. I reached my hand further into the dark and cursed the distance the light switch was from the doorway. I strained my arm, stretching it as far as it could go, trying to limit the amount my left half was exposed to the sticky blackness of the garage. My fingers groped for the switch. I'd spent a lot of time in this room, clearing the previous owner's hoard of antique 1980s furniture. I knew where the light was, and I never remembered it being this far. In the murky shadow I searched, waiting for the hoarse, unnatural voice to break the silence. You don't think, Wyatt, the voice jeered. I do your thinking for you. There it was. I found it. I fumbled, but finally got a two-finger grip on the switch and pulled it up. To my surprise, the light actually turned on. It illuminated a cramped, but otherwise undisturbed room, the owner of the voice not visible. I stepped through the threshold and towed, still on edge, to the corner of the garage. Next to a veritable pile of paint cans stood the box, small, but teeming with malice, practically pulsating. I felt a warm breeze hit my ear. It tickled, like a fly had grazed against it. I reached down towards the box, arms extended. My ear twitched again, the same feeling. I froze. I recognized what that breeze was, from years of sleeping next to someone. I was breathing. Something outside of my peripheral view was breathing wetly into my ear. I could smell it now, putrid and sour, reeking of rotting meat. Why do you think you came in here? It gurgled. It's because I made you. You didn't make me do anything, I squeaked. Those thoughts that brought you into this room, Wyatt, they are mine, not yours. I am the one who put them there. I felt a long, slender hand run through my hair, sloughing off what I can only assume was chunks of soft, decaying flesh, exposing the bone, which started to scratch my scalp painfully. I groaned in pain. Poor Wyatt. No mommy, no daddy, it shrieked gleefully. But so much doubt. The voice erupted into shrill, unhinged giggling. I felt a cold wetness dribble on my ear. Drool. A drop of blood from my raw scalp plopped on the floor. We were in a standstill. It was waiting for me to do something, say something, and I was afraid of what its response would be. My thoughts whirled with uncontrollable fears, drawing a picture of this invisible monster. In my mind, it was slender and tall, leathery gray shriveled skin with long, rangy appendages, and a hunched back, leaning ever closer with beady black eyes, and an eerie sharp-toothed grin, flesh caught in its blackened teeth. This image petrified me. There was nothing more terrifying than that. There was a brief moment where two warring forces in my soul stopped fighting and looked at me. It was a beautiful pause, one where the evil around me ceased to exist. It made sense. It made so much sense in that moment. Of course, that's how it was. My facilities slowly returned, and I laughed heartily. Booming, it echoed in the garage, bouncing off the walls and doubling, tripling in magnitude. It didn't quite sound like me, an edge that I had never noticed twinging my echo. It makes so much sense. I sprung into action, leaping over to the pile of paint cans and grabbing one of the thin handles with two hands. I blindly swung the can with my full weight. Right before the climax of the swing, I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and I was right. It wasn't as scary as I imagined. Nowhere close. Thunk. I hit it hard. The creature, which was at the very least much smaller than I expected it to be, burst into a busy cloud of, what was that? Pine needles. Without so much as a whimper, I stood amid the gently falling needles, drinking in my real and symbolic victory and the fresh aroma of the trees. I got to thinking, it makes sense. Every single frightening event that's happened since the journal came has been just that, scary. Not dangerous or life-threatening, only taking advantage of my shortcomings, fears, and uncertainty. That realization gave me relief. My intuition had been screaming at me each time I faced those somethings. The photograph, the nightmares, the creature in the garage, that I was going to die without any doubt. Maybe that was no longer true. There was not much else to do but get to the reason I came to the garage. In the first place, I plodded back to the corner where the box lay. I stared at it for a few beats, drunk in its innocence, and briefly lamented the loss of mine. Somberly, I pulled it open. The journal was still there, and I wasted no time. Anticipating some horrifying event, I flipped the cover and turned to the first page. The cursive was hard to make out at first. It was like no handwriting I'd ever seen before. Instead of the swirling, uniform script I had studied as a child, the leading and trailing lines of each letter were connected, independent of the word. It had a closed system circle from the beginning of the letter. Each other letter was similarly cryptic. I slowly started translating. The first word, objects, it wasn't English. It wasn't even a language I recognized. My great-grandfather was American. He spoke English, so why was his journal in another tongue? I turned to the next page to see if it was the same pseudo-language. It was blank. Blank. What? I kept flipping through the pages. They were all empty. I sat, looking at the first page, staring at the psychedelic font, expecting the puzzle pieces to somehow come together and reveal some hidden meaning. I was on the garage floor for a long time, until the lack of sunlight filtering through the cloudy glass in the garage door jerked me from my trance. I took one last hard look at the mystifying passage, trying to will something forward. An answer, perhaps. Suddenly, the words on the first page started to leak. The ink sump, cloudy, and expanding, slowly taking over the page until the entire sheet of paper was the darkest shade of black. Only one word remained in the very center of the page, one that wasn't there before, in perfect English cursive. Newcomer. The word disappeared, completing the page's transformation into an empty, striking darkness. It hit me with the same dread as the bottom of the ocean, or the depths of a pit would, something unknowable and unescapable. It began pulling at me then. I couldn't take my eyes off the page, and my hands and arms moved on their own, lifting it closer to my face, closer and closer, until I couldn't see anything but the void. My eyes closed and opened, but saw the same nothingness. And among all of this fascinating melancholy, I hardly noticed that I was losing consciousness. The tugging didn't quell. No, I was being led somewhere through the dark, somewhere I wanted to go, and I was about to find out where.